just again, to reiterate one more time, the importance to communicate on our syllabi and otherwise how our students should be using these resources. So with that, I think I'll pass it along to Christiane, I believe.
Yes, I think the second resource that we wanted to provide was something very practical. Yes, we had these discussions about AI and framing and definition, but one thing that we at the end of the day always more or less came back to is like, hey, how are we actually using it in the classroom? And people started sharing examples, brought up different ideas, how they used it, where it worked, where it didn't work, and that was always very interesting. And when we also talk about things like prompting, like how do you write a good prompt? People have been experimenting, but there are certain guidelines, certain things that might help actually to speed up the process a little bit. And as Nicola had mentioned, yes, we do not have any school overarching policies or directions or that what we how we have to use AI. But there are a lot of people who are using it on the, let's say, the grassroots level, I would say. So, talk if you had talked to other instructors, maybe in the hallway, you probably heard, "Hey, I used it for this, and this is where it was really helpful." And I think it's very inspiring to see what people are doing that works when we're thinking of it as a tool that can be used. Driven by the instructors, pedagogy driven, with the goal to improve students' proficiency. Like as we said, we want to lay the foundation. Why are we using AI? It is not, yes, and as in many other disciplines, there might be maybe a struggle of how to use it to really produce something meaningful. But also, one thing we mentioned before, there are several gaps that we still have in language instruction that we are craving to fill. And we have always been using technology for our benefit. So we were one of the first ones using video, right, for some authentic materials, for example. Language labs are very traditionally part of our fabric of language instruction, even audio, like audio recordings, including all of this has been seen as a beneficial addition to language learning so that students will have the well-rounded experience, the most immersive experience possible, right? And as we see the functions of AI, though, yes, you can say they could be used in a way to, of course, easily yeah, write a text at the elementary level. Yeah, I mean that you didn't even need AI for that. Uh, Google Translate anything elementary would be in first, but we've already been able to not combat, maybe even work with our students so that they understand how to use those tools, right? So in an elementary uh, course, using any translation tool is obviously detrimental to the goal of learning the language yourself. You're basically training a machine. So a lot of it is about student communication, but when we're looking at the more practical tasks, we can see there are use cases where for us in the language environment, but maybe also in other areas, there are things we can now do that we couldn't. So we identified three areas where we can immediately already show examples where our colleagues have been using MAI. For example, course prep, right? This is a very broad topic, but what are we trying to do? We are trying to create courses that are authentic, that are communicative, that are task-based, and where we have a connection between grammar and a task that students have to do, which we usually heavily rely on textbooks. But our goal is, we always say is, I mean, well, the textbook is kind of artificial, so we want our authentic materials. So we bring up videos. Our issue very often is, and there was a good example from Russia. And so you have a video, the level is way too high. Now with AI, in like seconds, we can reduce the level based on what our learners are capable of and still convey the content. There's also a way to create matching exercises using the vocabulary and the content with an AI in very simple steps. And I think one of our ideas was, for example, to show how this can be done for any language, right? Not only for the one that you're using. So that's also the nice thing about AI. There are some differences between the languages, but a lot of things are very transferable. The second thing is student practice opportunities. Students always ask us, what can I do outside of class? Yes, you can do some exercises in the text, but we are looking for authentic, for meaningful engagement. And there are several examples, and we focused mainly on one was that as our biggest desire that students have more and more speaking opportunities. And if you have ever tried using ChatGPT in the speaking mode, you can have a conversation with ChatGPT, but as we all know, as language instructors, conversation has to happen in a controlled, in a supervised environment that matches the reality, the learning reality of a student. So you cannot just have them use ChatGPT on itself, especially for beginner level, but there are ways to prompt and create opportunities for students to practice speaking on their language level. And there is actually a project here at the moment at NYU to create the first instructor-driven speaking tool for elementary speaking. We're currently doing it in English, but NYU is creating that. But there are also ways to actually share the prompts to show how can we experiment on this for our own classes. This is one example. The third one is individualist feedback. So as we know, language instruction does not thrive on multiple choice questions when we're looking at testing. Even mistakes that are made are heavily individualized, even there are some structural similarities. So the more individualized our feedback is to students, the better they can progress because they're also even their mistakes, they might have different trajectories depending on their backgrounds. Even that could even be a background in their first language. So we see different outcomes, but depending on the class size, it is difficult to give individualized feedback that is also based on standards. So far we've seen tools like ChatGPT work fairly well applying our standards like ACTFL or the European Framework of Languages. And there are ways to use and create exercises where students maybe produce something in a classroom, then they get feedback from us, from the instructor side, and then they can use, or they get preliminary feedback from ChatGPT, then guided by the instructors, and when we can experiment even with ways of giving them tools to use ChatGPT for self-study to further their proficiency. So we have examples of this from different language instructors here at NYU, and our goal will be to share 3 very practical ways that you could then also other instructors can also try out in their area so that we can create a community of practice here that has good models to take from.